everyone, Ashley here and welcome to another video on the Penguin Palace Stamps YouTube channel. Today I am super excited to share this beautiful card that I made with one of the stencils from Penguin Palace Stamps' newest stenciling system as part of their newest release. This is called the Stencils 360 and I'm going to walk you through exactly how it works and how I made this card using it in this video. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here on the screen you can see the base for the Stencils 360 system, which is basically just a big piece of plastic with a circular opening and lots of markings around. I've now put in the paper holder, and this is a clear piece of plastic with a little yellow arrow up at the top that you can line up with the top of the circle markings on the Stencils 360 base, and that just tells you that it is perfectly aligned. These plastic pieces have little openings in them, and it's hard to tell on the screen where that opening is because it's clear, but you can see I'm placing my piece of paper right into that opening now. So it lines up perfectly with the opening in that window plastic, and it's a very thick piece of plastic actually. I'm struggling to get it out because it's so thick, but it's definitely very, very sturdy and you won't have any question that your paper is placed perfectly. So once you've placed your paper, and as you saw, I just used a little bit of removable tape for that, I can then use my stencil aligner. Now this is actually called a guide ring, and it slots right into your Stencils 360 base. So again, you just put it right into that circular opening, and then you just tape it in to sort of keep it in place, and there's little sort of cross-hatched markings showing you where that tape should go. And that means that that tape won't interfere with your pattern. Finally, I can bring in my stencil, and I just lay that again right into the center of that opening, and that's what that guide ring does. It really gives you the right size of opening you need for your stencil, and there's multiple different sizes of guide rings for the multiple different sizes of stencils. You can see that I was just pointing at the top there to that little heart cutout, and that's basically what you need to line up with the top of the Stencils 360 markings, and then you use that little marking to rotate your stencil around the circle and around the whole circle of the base. And the shape of that little marking basically indicates how often you have to turn it and what those intervals should be. And they're all marked on that Stencils 360 base. So because there's a heart in this stencil, I basically ink blended through when it's lined up at the top, and then I turn the stencil to go to the next heart marking on the Stencils 360 base. And then I can ink blend again. And I'm just using some spun sugar distress oxide ink here for a really cute feminine pink color tone to this card. So I'm going to speed up the video here, and you can see that I just repeat the same steps over and over. I ink blend, and then I turn the stencil within its opening to the next heart on the Stencils 360 base. And it's really easy to see where you have to turn because the hearts are really obvious and the lines are super easy to follow. So you just turn and blend, and eventually you'll have turned enough that you get the entire pattern completed. And you get this beautiful flower pattern with a really nice opening in the center. Now, the Sacred Lotus Stencil set actually comes with 3 stencils, and I used the first one, which I would say is the big leaf part, and now I'm using this detail part, which adds a really pretty leafy detail. And I'm using a darker pink color to blend on this one. I believe this is Picked Raspberry Distress Oxide, and I'm doing the exact same method here, so you'll see the same thing again. So again, I start by lining up that heart notch on the stencil with the top heart line on the Stencils 360 base. And then I ink, and then I rotate, and then I blend again, and then I rotate again. So it's just alternating blending and rotating until you get your stencil all the way around. And like I mentioned, this stencil fits perfectly into that area because I'm using the 8-inch guide ring, and this is an 8-inch stencil. And you'll see for the next example, it's actually a smaller stencil, so I'm going to switch out the guide ring for a smaller or different sized guide ring. And there's a guide ring for every size of stencil. So that's the beautiful finished look that you get, and this was so easy because I just used 2 colors of Distress Oxide ink and 2 different types of stencils that are both the same size. And when you overlap them, you get that really intricate pattern. So like I mentioned, I'm moving on to the third part of that stencil set, which is the small leaf stencil. And for this one, I decided to use a different size of paper because I'm actually going to be cutting out the pattern and overlaying it onto the previous pattern that I just did. So I cut out a piece of white cardstock at 4 inches by 4 inches, and now I'm using the 4-inch square paper positioner, and that's a piece of clear plastic. It's hard to see on video, but it's in there, and you can kind of see that little yellow arrow at the top, which is pointing to the top, and the little 4-inch symbol showing that that's the 4-inch paper positioner. So I used that, I stuck down my piece of paper with a little bit of repositionable tape, And now the paper is good to go for the stencil. So I grabbed out the 4-inch guide ring, which I'm showing here, and lining it up again with that top arrow of the Stencils 360 base to make sure everything is nice and straight and those lines all align along the edges. I'm again using a little bit of masking tape and just adding it here onto each of those little notched areas to make sure that those tapes don't interfere with the stencil and the pattern that you get. So this is the small leaf part of the Sacred Lotus Stencil set. And again, it has that little heart notch at the top, so I know to rotate it around to the symbols that are hearts. So for this one, I'm using some antique linen Distress Oxide ink because I wanted a really nice soft yellow that I thought would go nicely with the pink. So I'm just blending and again doing the same thing as before. So blend, turn so that that heart notch goes to the next heart symbol, blend again, and continue until the circle pattern is done. And again, this is super simple, and I like how even using one color of Distress Oxide ink, you still get kind of that two-toned look because in the areas where the ink overlaps, you get that darker color. So it almost looks like you're using 2 shades of yellow, which is really, really nice. And it's a really nice, easy way to get a cool look. So to finish off this card, I am just using some of the new stamps that Penguin Palace Stamps also just released. This stamp says, "I am beyond grateful," which I thought was a really nice, thankful sentiment, and it is from their Heartfelt Notes stamp set, which again is a new stamp set to this release. So I just inked that up with some picked raspberry Distress Oxide ink because I wanted it to match perfectly with the lotus detailed pattern that will be behind it. And a lot of people don't use Distress Oxide inks for stamping very much, and I wouldn't normally use them either for anything that's really detailed, but I thought that it worked really nice for this sentiment, and I have to say the stamping came out really well, so I would do it again. So I'm just cutting around the edge of this yellow leaf pattern because I wanted it to be adhered and elevated onto foam on top of that background panel, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. I'm just taking that background panel and gluing it down onto a white card base using some liquid glue. I like to use liquid glue for big panels like this because it means that you can kind of shimmy it around a little bit and make sure that you got it placed just right before it really sticks, which is important for me because I tend to put things down in the wrong place at first. So I'm just sticking that down, and then I used a bit of foam onto the back of that second lotus flower bit, and I'm sticking that right down onto the middle of my card. I'm using the foam, and I just used some double-sided tape on either side of that foam. So I'm positioning that very carefully to make sure that it's right in the center of the card and right in the center of the pattern, and then just sticking it down. So that is the main part of the card done. The last step that I did was to add some gemstone embellishments, and I went a little bit overboard, if that's even possible with gems. And I added different sizes of gems to each little part. So I added some medium-sized ones to the edge of that inner lotus piece. I added some large ones to the outside tips of that inner lotus piece, and then I added some small ones to those sort of crevices. And I like how with these stencil patterns you can really pick really nice geometric ways to display your gems throughout those patterns, which is really pretty. So that is all for today. That is the card that I made, and I'm loving this new stenciling system. It honestly makes stenciling so fun and so easy, and I can't wait to show you guys more videos that I've made with it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!